I was actually really interested in this video because I don't honestly know the answer to this question. I have a general vague idea. This channel is how money works, and it's what the does the board of directors actually do? We always hear about board of directors. We always hear of what they could do or what they're responsible for or something, but like we don't actually know. So I'm kind of curious. Let's find out.
To kick off the new year, Mark Zuckerberg, a man who is definitely not having a midlife crisis, announced that Dana White—
He's definitely having a midlife crisis. I think enough people made fun of him for being a robot that he took it way too seriously.
The president and CEO of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, had been elected to Meta's board of directors. The decision—
I didn't know that. So Dana White is now the director in the board of directors for Meta. That is extremely interesting. There's nothing, you know, there's no benefit or insider information there at all. That's not sketchy.
The decision was met with some mixed reactions from company employees and stakeholders. But what most people don't realize is that this decision is really not that unusual. The board of the embattled Boeing Corporation recently appointed Mortimer J. Buckley, the former CEO of the Vanguard Group, who also serves on the board of Pfizer, alongside James Quincy, the CEO of the Coca-Cola Company, who also serves on its board.
That just seems sketchy. That you can be involved deep in so many different companies as the CEO of a major company, talking to other CEOs of major companies. I mean, you could literally fabricate the entire existence of a human being by just rubbing shoulders with the guy to your right. Hey, man, if we pop this study out that says sugar is really bad, I'll rub shoulders with Pfizer, and then they'll also pump out something that says these SGLT2 inhibitors waste sugar. And then I'll rub shoulders with James Quincy, who is the CEO of Coca-Cola, so that he can pump the marketing for diet soda at the same time, and we'll run house on this bitch. Like, that's really what this is.
Board alongside Bella Bahara, the chief content officer of Netflix, who serves under a board which includes Anne Sweeney, the former chairman of the FX networks, who worked under Tony Vincent Cara, the chairman of the Fox Networks Group, who currently serves on the board of Qualcomm, a company formerly managed by Stephen Mollenkopf, who currently sits on the board of directors of Boeing. It's a great big club, and you ain't in it. But what the f do these people actually do?
On Monday, Meta founder and CEO Mark Zuckerberg announced that UFC president Dana White will be joining his company's board of directors.
January, he tapped Dana White for a Meta board spot and is now ending this fact-checking.
Metro Health Board of Trustees terminated Dr. Boutros yesterday.
First of all, I think the ending of fact-checking is the most brilliant idea ever, because it's never going to work anyways when you have a extremist group, like extremist ideological freaks, making the facts and narrating the facts. It's just irrelevant. You can never have a group of people that have a political bias be fact checkers, because they're never going to even fact checked in a way that is not biased. Like, them going on internet and searching is going to require the exertion of their bias. Like, it's just a stupid idea. It's never going to work.
Yesterday, effective immediately.
Before you can understand what modern boards of directors actually do, you should first understand what they are supposed to do. If you get appointed to the board of directors of a major company, it is not a full-time job. If everything is running smoothly, you might only need to show up for a monthly or quarterly board meeting where you will receive a presentation on how the company is going from the management team. Normally, this presentation is given by the CEO. But they can also bring in other executives if they are talking to the board about a particular area of interest in the company.
What is she doing? She's just drawing. Why is everyone looking at her drawing a triangle? That is the fucking... This is the dumbest B-roll I've ever seen in my entire life. She's... Look at how everyone's just like looking over as if she's doing something revolutionary, or they just have like some random Excel document up in the background. It's crazy.
If, as a random example, the company wanted to invest $46 billion into an augmented reality social platform, the CEO might bring in their technology officer and the chief financial officer to talk about the viability of that project. The role of the board is to provide advice, or in extreme cases, veto the ideas of company leadership, which hopefully acts in the interest of the shareholders who they represent. The CEO doesn't need to listen to them, but the board has the power to fire them, so if they want to keep their high-paying job, they normally try their very best to keep them happy. The board also oversees executive compensation. CEOs and shareholders are not always necessarily aligned on objectives. If you are a CEO,
Yeah, it's also funny. This is just a side tangent, and it pisses me off so much. Elon, like all these people are so upset about Elon, and like on Tesla subreddits or Tesla forums right now, it's like everyone's like, I got to get rid of my Tesla. I don't want to drive the swastika car. And it's like, dude, do you realize like Elon doesn't really even play a role in Tesla? He didn't even really play a role in the development of Tesla. He didn't invent the Tesla. He just literally observes the business operating. Like that's all he does. It's so crazy to me fundamentally how people just but here's the thing. If it's any other CEO, if it's any other CEO and they do something horrible, you know, the fucking people are still going to use whatever product they're using from them. You know, the pink-haired lady lighting the Bath and Body Works candles every night doesn't think about what that CEO is doing or saying online. But suddenly, you know, Elon Musk is now the guy that everyone considers to be the word bearer and the one that needs to be, his business is just, first of all, it's not even his fucking business. It's just crazy. People are ludicrous, man. Side tangent, but people care so much about what these people are doing and they don't even understand how what they are doing fundamentally works.
a CEO, your number one priority is to make as much money as you can while you have your job, by A, not getting fired, and B, securing the biggest pay packet possible. This can mean that CEOs often prioritize short-term wins over long-term business stability, because it doesn't matter if
true. You see this a lot in business with video games, because a lot of these CEOs will literally pump the video game in a public display and say, well, we're going to do really great because we're making this video game for a modern audience. And that might, in a short-term sense, make everything seem really good because, well, if we can make the game more, you know, generally acceptable to everybody, then we're going to make more money. But at the end of it all, what you get is a game that doesn't make any money, because a game made for everybody is a game made for nobody. And so you might get a lot of pre-order sales, but then, you know, the guy collects his paycheck as a CEO because he made these shitty decisions. And it turns out, well, the game is shit and it has a lot of these weird ideologies in it. And now we're going to refund the game. And guess what happens to the CEO? He gets fired, but he gets a golden umbrella to ride all the way down on. So it's, I don't know. It's just like these shitty, it's a really odd infrastructure that we use that's repeated and rehashed over and over again. And it's clear that it's fundamentally flawed in a lot of ways.
if the share price is great in 10 years' time if they get fired for a year of poor stock performance. The board of directors is supposed to add a level of human intelligence and long-term thinking to business.
Yeah, it's, I mean, it's literally Concord, right? And that team got like thrashed as soon as that happened. But in most cases, that game would have sold, people would have bought it, and then later on, the funds would have been, you know, evaluated as like, oh shit, we had a lot of refunds. And I think, you know, it's just a really interesting situation, honestly. Like, who, you have to realize, like, in video games, in Marvel, for instance, the new Black America came out, you know, and like, what the fuck is that movie, dude? I liked Falcon. Like, he should have just stayed Falcon. But when we lost Captain America, we also lost him. Now he's Captain America. He's a black dude trying to preach ideologies. I just don't care. Like, I don't want that in my superhero movie. A black guy can be strong and powerful. I don't care. But don't like try to twist this and now make Captain America a black guy and then make the whole role about ideologies. And like, this isn't what people want to watch, man. They want to watch a fucking superhero movie with a guy kicking ass and awesome CGI. And it's like, we failed to even do that. I don't know who CEOs are even talking to get the idea that this is a good idea. Like, no one's talking to them to be like, you know what we should do? Let's just race swap Captain America and we'll just talk about how awful white people are. Oh, great. This sounds like a beautiful idea. Okay. It's going to make us lots of money, obviously, because everybody hates white people, of course. It's just, you know, 90% of our demographic is white males or something like that. It shouldn't matter. Okay.
Business management and call out CEOs that are just gaming the system to enrich themselves. Now, the other thing is, if you are a company director, you don't technically need to do any of this. You don't even really need to show up to the once a quarter meetings. There is nobody who sits above you in the corporate hierarchy, so there is nobody to fire you. To sweeten the deal, compensation for serving on the board of large public companies can be extremely generous.
Dana White has a pretty proven track record of making solid business decisions related to building the UFC. He's a snake, but I trust him. Yeah, I think most of these people, like, you can trust them to build infrastructure, and that's probably the most important part. Like, here's the thing that I think a lot of people also don't realize. Like, if you took me and you said, all right, Kolton, start from zero, it would still take me a ton of time to build a reputation online, to get a base of clients, to, do all the things that I've done. But I bet your ass I could do it in a quarter of the time it took me to get to where I am now, because I already have all that information. So when you pull somebody in who's managed such large systems like that, they can see from a level starting from the ground up that is unlike anybody else coming into that situation. Like, when you've managed people, when you've ran a company that's hundreds of people big, you have skills that do require experience, and those matter. And I think it's like I would say he's probably a great businessman. Is he the least sketchy person in a room? Probably not, but he probably makes money. He probably prints that shit, to be honest.
Generous. According to company filings, in the fiscal year 2023, the directors of Meta were paid between $397,000 and $4.2 million in equity, cash, and travel reimbursements. This can be especially...
Who paid that lady $4.2 million? That is, like, ludicrous to do something like that. For like, what are they doing that's actually worth $4.2 million? Like, what in the fuck are they actually doing? Like, you put a random Joe up there and I bet he would do a better job, genuinely.
Especially lucrative.
You know how to manage a Google Sheets document, an Excel document? Great. Okay. Do you know how to run a meeting? Sure. Okay. Do you know what the general populace wants with a social media app? Probably more than that lady does.
If you work your way onto multiple boards, like...
Unrelated question, have you ever coached strongman athletes? Absolutely. Lots of them, actually.
Alex Skorsky or Deborah Reed, who sit on 4 public boards each, including some of the world's most valuable companies. This practice actually used to be much worse up until a few years ago, but more on why that changed a bit later. It's not a bad gig if you can get it. So if you're thinking that showing up to a meeting a few times a year for 6 or 7 figures sounds like a good deal to you, here is how you land to just be paying themselves their own money back anyway, which doesn't really make much sense. But there are some real benefits to sitting on the board. As a member of the board, they will be privy to company information that isn't shared with regular investors, and more importantly, they can fire the CEO if they feel like they are not doing a good job. If you ever find yourself raising venture capital for a new startup, you should know that you can be fired from your own company if you give away enough board seats by selling away too much ownership in your business. You can write rules into the company bylaws to prevent this, but then you might find it much harder to raise capital from investors who want to keep the big red button option. Of course, VC firms really don't want to do this, because if you still own a majority of the company, you can make life difficult for them to get a return on their investment in other ways. But having checks and balances on power is always a good thing, even in tiny little startups. So unless you already have millions of dollars to invest, or you're really interested in some new technology or nonprofit initiative, you are probably going to prefer being a board member of a public company instead. Once a company goes public, there are a lot of rules about how a board is elected, and shareholders must be able to vote on representation. So in theory, a company's board of directors should act like elected representatives who always act in the best interest of their constituents, right? Well, it's time to learn how money works to find out how modern boardrooms actually work. This week's video is sponsored by Ground News.
It's really interesting. I learned a lot about this from actually researching the Manions, which I still have not finished that script, you guys. But the Jim Manion and like the General Manions are like, that situation is insane. And I have like so much understanding of how like board meetings work and how general investments in companies work and how they can really cycle money through a system. Like, it's pretty nuts. But it is interesting to me that you basically, you know, there's like these companies, for example, like Ubisoft. There's a company called Tencent, which is a Chinese company, and they're looking to snipe Ubisoft at a low cost. They have people in the company that they're likely paying to make the company lesser in value by putting out a worse product. Essentially what they're doing is like trying to devalue Ubisoft so they can come in, snipe the company, grab as many shares as possible, fire the CEO, plant a CEO that they want, and then run the company to boost the income and flip it, essentially, like revert the company back to a profit-making model and then sell it again. And it's really interesting, like the sort of almost like mafia style of transactional relationships that develop at this level. It's very interesting. It was the board of directors of the WWE that kept it going for so long. Yeah. Well, and these are the people that, like, they have to, right? Because their investments are the company, and so their best interest is to get the company to succeed. It's just such an interesting concept, right? Like, you have to get the company to succeed, but oftentimes, like, there's short-term things that, like, you could swing, right? So if a company is evaluating poorly, you could make a short-term decision that would boost its evaluation, but further damage the company's evaluation in the future. But before that happens, and that, valuation goes up, or the stock price goes up, so your share goes way, way up, multi-millions, multi-billions in some cases, you pop the cherry, leave, and now you cash out, and the company fails like a year later because you made a short-term decision that fucked it. Similar to how, like, Jaguar made the gay ad recently, and it's like it just lost, like, so many investors overnight. Like, the company literally sank. It's like, leading up to that, there was somebody behind the scenes who was making decisions, probably for some reasons similar to that. Who knows, though? Who knows?
Your support. According to company filings compiled by Fortune magazine, the average age of an S&P 500 board member is 63.1 years old. That's the average. So for every Mark Zuckerberg who is only 40 years old, there's an 86-year-old holding...
Mark is 40 years old? Bro looks younger than me. Oh my God, I'm old.
...their board seat like it's a Senate
Jesus.
seat. Anyway, the real job of most board members in modern companies is to be a contact network between regulators, politicians, and other business leaders. The reason that board directors tend to be so old is because these roles are often just given to people who have already had long and prestigious careers in business or government and have built up a long list of friends in high places. Dana White may genuinely be a very talented businessman, and there is actually a surprising amount of overlap between the mindless hand-to-hand combat that takes place on Facebook and the UFC. But the real reason he was elected to the board is not so subtly because he is close friends with the newly elected president. Trump's administration has made it very well known that they are going to be more business-friendly and slow down all the actions of the SEC and the FTC.
Crypto,
Which, by the way, I'm very excited for. Okay? By the way, I'm very excited for. It's going to be a great time, man. Great 4 years to own a business.
Let it grow. We're going to let it grow. On day one, I will fire Gary Gensler and appoint a new SEC chairman.
But that's all with the exception of just two businesses, Alphabet and Meta. Hating the biggest, most invasive tech companies might very well be the one thing that unites America. Getting Dana White on the board means that Meta has a friendly connection to the White House. Now, the same could have been achieved with a much less high-profile board nomination. Dana is not the only person with friendly ties to the incoming administration, but outside of Elon Musk, who has his own social media company, he's probably the most famous person that could reasonably fill this role. The reason that you are hearing about this appointment is because the company wants you to hear about it. It's a marketing play to signal that the company is not some soy cap-sipping California hive mind. Modern boards really act as a contact network and marketing display to other institutions.
That's the whole push. It's why, so it's all perfectly timed, and I promise you, Donald Trump was talking to Mark before any of this happened, and before, like, that was before, Mark went kind of reverted his content policy on fact checking. It's before he reverted the policy on censorship on the platforms, allowing you to say things like retard and you're gay and things like that on the platform. It's before all of that they started talking, and then you started to see Mark turn into this, like, red pill dude who's like training jujitsu. He's wearing like street clothing with graphics that are really sick. He's growing his hair out. He stops putting on a suit. He's wearing sneakers instead of fucking shiny leather shoes, like driving sports cars, hanging out with really young women. he changes his external appearance. And then not only that, but they also, hire this guy or put him on the board. And it's very clear, like, the idea is to be more conservative as a company, because as the election showed, as much as people online would not like you to believe it, the majority of our modern America is conservative. Thanks for the past, 6 years of hell causing that to happen. But it is a fun fact to see that it's basically a change in times, and Meta is just being smart and trying to follow suit. Unlike other companies, you have Twitter, or well, formerly Twitter, now known as X, do the same thing, did it earlier. So they've done it. You have Facebook, Meta, or Facebook, Instagram, Threads that have done it. And now really, like, what is left? Reddit. And now the government is, basically saying that Reddit is conspiratorial, and they're thinking about shutting it down, which there's probably a lot of truth to that from the evidence that they have. So very interesting, man. Super interesting thing.
And government agencies. Some of the most popular jobs for retired senior government personnel is to sit on the board of directors. That is because it's a pretty low intensity retirement gig that pays them very well, and their lifetime of building contacts through their career is a pretty big asset to their company. Another perk for certain companies is it gives them a level of credibility in their business functions. Military supply companies, including Boeing from earlier, normally have 1 or 2 retired high-ranking military personnel on their board to signal that they listen directly to the armed forces. The final reason that modern boards have become so cozy is something you're not really.
That's so true as well. Every general that I was fortunate enough to meet in the military, which wasn't many, I think it was 3, they all were placed as, or even like brigade, so even like colonels and the, upper echelon officers were always placed as either CEOs of companies or on the board of companies. And it's very interesting how that happens.
Really allowed to say out loud. If companies have a long history of electing former government officials to their board, then current government officials might try to get a little bit more cozy with them to secure a nice post-retirement gig for themselves. So yeah, if you want to get elected to the board of directors, you really need to start filling out a contact list of anybody and everybody that could make or break a company. If you want to go the private route, you should work in audit or a big consulting firm, or work in a government authority like the SEC or the FTC. And don't be like Lena Khan and, actually do your job a little bit too well. The board is supposed to represent the best interest of shareholders, but it's becoming harder and harder to determine what that actually means. The largest shareholders in most public companies are almost always Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street, large asset managers that build index funds on behalf of other investors or institutions.
BlackRock is crazy, man. If you guys have the time, you need to look into BlackRock and like what they actually purchase, because it is insane. The degree of things that they truly purchase, and housing, land. I'm surprised it's allowed, because they own so much. Most infrastructure you see in a city is somewhat or at least fully owned by BlackRock.
It's really hard to ask about the role of those companies without going down the lizard man rabbit hole claiming they secretly control the world. The reality is a little bit less entertaining, but the immense scale that these companies have grown to means that if you want to be elected to the board of directors, you really only need their vote rather than the vote of the other shareholders. Now, these companies don't actually own the shares themselves. They own them in a trust on behalf of the actual investors who buy into their index funds. Some of these funds have even started introducing tools to allow their investors to vote on how the fund itself will vote. But the kind of set and forget investors that buy these index funds normally aren't that interested in submitting.
Here's the tip, you guys. Honestly though, Vanguard, there's a couple ones like Fidelity, Vanguard, whatever you want to do. Go start a Roth IRA, okay? And start dumping in like $100, $200, $300 in there a month, whatever you can afford. If it's more, afford more. I put $600 a month in. Do that. You're going to make more money in 20 years than you'd make basically in any other investment, unless you get extremely fortunate. So if I was to retire at 55 and I put about $600 every year into a Roth IRA, I would walk out of that Roth IRA a millionaire. Okay. It's super important. Just a, heads up.
proxy votes for the hundreds of companies in these investment products, so the asset managers themselves have a lot of influence over shaping boardrooms, and by extension, the companies they oversee. The reason that there aren't as many directors that sit on dozens of boards at a time anymore is because both BlackRock and Vanguard introduced policies where they would vote against any director that already held 4 or more board seats in public companies. In a clear demonstration of just how much power these passive guidelines can have, there are no longer any S&P 500 directors that hold more than 4 board seats, although there are a lot that hold exactly 4. So, make of that what you will. Now, you might think this actually seems like a positive effect. It's limiting just how consolidated the global directors club can get, but the problem is that you may not necessarily agree with the other ways that they use their massive votes. The voting guidelines for these companies are available online for anybody to read, but of course, most people never will. In these documents, there is heavy emphasis on diversity, inclusivity, representation, and environmental efforts in boardroom votes. Again, these might very well be great initiatives, but there it creates 2 problems. One is the internal regulatory efforts that are normally highly ineffective, and are often just used as a way for companies to claim that they can keep themselves accountable.
Yeah, I think like it's just a DEI in total is a concept is just a way for CEOs and corporate likes to literally, it's just corpos flaunting that they do something. It doesn't actually mean anything. I think people hold on to the thing so much, and it's like, dude, it means nothing. Like, it literally means nothing. It's just people making more money, and you know, people want to hold their whole identity to it. I think it's hilarious.
No need for government authorities to perform real checks. The second problem it creates is that it's become really easy for well-connected corporate interests to stack boards with who they want based on ticking boxes, rather than electing someone genuinely looking out for shareholders. The consequences of boards that aren't as critical as they could be are things like record CEO pay, even if paying someone hundreds of millions of dollars isn't really in the best interest of investors. So if this job still sounds like a sweet gig for you, step 1 is to gather as many high-profile connections as you can. Step 2 is to get cozy with company leadership. Step 3 is to tick as many boxes on the Vanguard voting guidelines as possible, and step 4 is to still care enough. By the time you get this far, you have probably had a very long and successful career. And unless you are working in the government for most of that time, a few $100,000 a year isn't going to change much for you. So the real reason you would want a board seat is for the power and prestige, without the trade-offs of hanging out with the strange people that inhabit Congress. The stagnation of corporate boardrooms has also led to a lot of companies just following the latest investment trend, even if it makes absolutely no business sense. Making profits doesn't matter if the whole company can just be sold to a bigger company that wants it out of the way. Go and watch this video on how companies got so dumb to see how that's working out for them. And make sure to subscribe to keep on.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I understand really like what it just seems so built around a lot of other people making a copious amount of money.